Hi, my name is Frank Schaeffer, and may I tell you what Project 2025 really is? Now, I just had my 72nd birthday, but years ago when I was a young man, in my teens, in my 20s, as the nepotistic sidekick to my evangelist father, Francis Schaeffer, I met all the people who 50 years later can be seen to have laid the foundation for Project 2025, for the takeover of the Republican Party, for the manipulation of Donald Trump should he be reelected, with a program that has its roots in the Roman Catholic Middle Ages. Let me explain my introduction to this project. Back in the day, my dad had a ministry in Switzerland called L'Abri Fellowship. And one of the people who would visit us on a quite regular basis, because he had a chalet on the other side of the mountain, was the founder of the National Review magazine, the ultra-conservative William F. Buckley. Now, Bill Buckley would come over and have tea with Dad, and as Dad's nepotistic sidekick, I would sit in on their conversations, throw in my 2 cents worth once in a while, and we were talking about the fact that Bill believed that somehow our country was taken over by a liberal elite and they needed to be pushed back in some way. He founded a magazine to do some of that pushing back. And Bill was an intellectual. He was a terrific interviewer. He had his program Firing Line, and he talked to all sorts of people. Unlike today's religious right that only talked to themselves, he would reach out and talk to people he even disagreed with. But when he would come talk to us, he and my dad saw eye to eye on issues like abortion, on the rising power of the feminist movement. They were both conservatives. They believed that this secular humanist direction of our culture was going to be bad for us. In the best of all worlds, Bill Buckley would have been living in a Roman Catholic dominated world where there was no contraceptives, there was no abortion, there was no sexual promiscuity, as he called it, which was sex before marriage, et cetera, et cetera. But he was an old-fashioned conservative, an educated man, would have despised, loathed, vomited at the sight of Donald Trump, had a keen nose for con artists, and would have had nothing to do with him. At about the same time, there was a breakaway bishop in the Roman Catholic Church who became famous, that some of you may have heard of and a lot of you have not heard of, by the name of Archbishop Lefebvre. Archbishop Lefebvre and my dad saw eye to eye, though Archbishop Lefebvre was a Roman Catholic and my father was a Reformed Calvinist Protestant, on the fact that we should not depart from what they called the Christian tradition. So, for instance, Lefebvre got in trouble with the Vatican because back in the 1960s and 70s, he railed against Vatican II, the conference that, quote unquote, modernized the Roman Catholic Church and put the Latin Mass into English. Boy, why is Frank Schaeffer diving into the weeds like this? Because I'm giving you a little bit of a history lesson that unfortunately even our, quote, prestige press seems to be ignorant of. So when Dad and Lefebvre talked, they talked about the modernization of the Roman Catholic Church and how bad this was. And Dad and Lefebvre would draw comparisons with what happened to evangelical Protestants when liberal mainline denominations took over institutions like Princeton University and replaced the fundamentalists who had been in those schools, people like Machen and other theologians who were thrown out in the 1920s, and were replaced by liberal mainline, mainstream evangelicals, and then liberal Protestants. Okay. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Well, fast forward to the 1970s when Dad and I were making an anti-abortion project with C. Everett Koop, who became Ronald Reagan's Surgeon General, called Whatever Happened to the Human Race. And I had a meeting with Archbishop Fulton Sheen of New York, who at that time had a very popular television program. And I remember meeting with the bishop 3 times in his apartment on Park Avenue, by the way, a very nicely appointed apartment, as bishops tend to have. And he told me, you and your dad, Francis, are like the cavalry coming over the hill to rescue our movement. And by our movement, he meant conservative Roman Catholics standing up for what they regard as the ancient tradition. No abortion, no contraceptives, no sex before marriage, anti-gay, no homosexual marriage, no tolerance of any deviance from the Roman Catholic vision of a theocratic state, right back into the Middle Ages, pre-Reformation, pre-Enlightenment, pre-science, superstition all the way down. Now, Fulton Sheen introduced me to some people from an outfit called the Knights of Columbus, some of who were members of an organization called Opus Dei. Now, by the time you get to Opus Dei, you are talking about the deep-seated, fascistic, intolerant wing of the Roman Catholic Church. Stuff that sounds like it's out of a novel, but it's for real. What are their roots in modern Europe? Modern Europe. Francisco fascists in Spain. Francisco fascists, as opposed to, say, German fascists, that followed in the footsteps of the dictatorship of Spain and Portugal, pushing back against what they regarded as modernism. And this organization was founded, it's a shadowy, secret organization, to help push forward a fascistic, Roman Catholic centralized agenda that would both crush freedom and democracy and at the same time give a place of precedence to so-called religious liberty, but just for one religion. Staunch Roman Catholic traditionalists in the line of Archbishop Lefebvre, Bill Buckley, Fulton Sheen. And so Opus Dei became this organization in Europe and in the United States of people in high places in government and other places that genuinely, and I know this sounds weird, in an age of conspiracy theories where there are very few conspiracies for real, but this actually was a conspiracy to put people in high places and to influence the democratic process and, if possible, someday take it over in the name of the church. Exactly the same program that the inquisitors of the Spanish Inquisition that were torturing Protestants and Jews and others would have been familiar with back in the day. No stretch at all. Now, back in the 1970s and 80s, there were a couple influential people like Richard John Neuhaus, who started First Things magazine. He was a Lutheran pastor who converted to the Roman Catholic Church. Fast forward, much as J.D. Vance has converted. And why Richard converted, and I knew him pretty well. In fact, when he started First Things, he asked me to write a couple of articles for them, which I did, and I brought him some other authors. For instance, I brought him a lot of people who published with Regression Gateway, which was the hard right fundamentalist version of Catholicism in those days, the kind of thing that produced eventually Amy Coney Barrett, who grew up reading books published by Regression Gateway, etc. And I remember that his program was to also, quote, bring the church back. So they had two enemies. The modern Vatican, as they saw it, they wanted the Mass in Latin. They wanted everything kept the same. No women in the priesthood, not even girls serving at the altar, nothing. The priest facing the altar, not the people. All of those traditions reestablished, but they also had a right-wing project to not only save America from democracy, I just said that, save America from democracy and replace it with theocracy and what they regarded as the law of God. But their program went a step further, and that was that they should undermine and overthrow the government as it existed. And why did all these threads come together? Because my dad wrote a book called A Christian Manifesto that sold 1 million copies. And the mainstream press paid no attention to it because back pre-Trump, they could care less about all those people in the middle, the unwashed mob who believed in literal Jesus and all this stuff, paid no attention. But it sowed the seeds of a movement which eventually became the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society that came out of what Lefebvre was doing, Bill Buckley, Fulton Sheen, Neuhaus, me, my dad, and others. Fast forward to the present, Project 2025. You thought I'd never get to that. Where does Project 2025 come from? It comes from this background. Who did the leaders of Project 2025 work with, and what association do they belong to? Opus Dei. What is the mission of Opus Dei today? The same thing it was in Francisco fascist Spain in the 1930s and 40s. What is their vision for America? Well, it was laid out in a book called Unhumans, in which liberals and evangelicals who don't toe the line on the hard right, say evangelicals who don't vote for Trump, and everyone except conservative Roman Catholics and evangelicals tuned in to having heroes like Lefebvre, if they've read enough, or Fulton Sheen, or Neuhaus, and for more modern versions of these people, Opus Dei, who have put in place people like Amy Coney Barrett, who basically, her kind, were groomed for 50 years by the Federalist Society, people I knew back in the 70s and 80s who started these organizations, Heritage Foundation. But they'd kind of given up on changing our culture. They'd given up on their program. They expected Hillary Clinton to be elected. They saw that we had a first Black president that went against everything they believed in. They were despairing. And then comes Trump. Now, a lot of the people in Opus Dei, and back in the day, people like Richard John Neuhaus were educated people, people who loathed low-life con artists like Trump, self-evident liars, self-serving, money-grubbing people selling rotten steaks at overinflated prices, stupid television shows, real estate con games, tax cheating, tax evasion, not paying their workers, one bullshit artist thing after another, multiple marriages, affairs, flying around on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, accused of rape of a 13-year-old girl, brags about grabbing women by, I'm sorry, I'm going to say what he said, the pussy, and getting away with it. They would have had nothing to do with him. And eventually, when he was running for office, a lot of these same types of people, although my old friend Bill Buckley was dead by that time, as was Richard John Neuhaus, would have vomited at the prospect of the MAGA movement following this cult leader and con artist. And they would have put it down to bad education and stupidity. They would have been much harsher in their words about Trump than Hillary Clinton ever was. Fast forward to the present when he's running again for president against Kamala Harris. Now, all of a sudden, the Opus Dei people running the Federalist and Heritage Foundations jump into line saying, look, he is such a dumbass, getting $350,000 for promoting a Bible, selling sneakers, portraits of him as a superhero. He's an idiot. They know that. They say that in private. All these people would go, if you ask them what they thought about Donald Trump. But he can be manipulated because the very fact he has no program except his own self-gratification and con artist petty criminality, the fact that he can be completely manipulated, as he was by Ralph Reed in his first presidency, when Ralph said to him, look, if I'll give you a list from the Federalist Society, if you make them judges, I'll bring you evangelical votes from the pro-life movement, even though you're not a pro-lifer, even though you probably are the father of many children who were aborted by your mistresses and porn stars and the rest. We'll pretend that didn't happen. We'll say God has a prophecy about you and we'll make you president. Now, in the second term, Trump has a much higher stakes bid. He's trying to stay out of prison. He's trying to stay a step ahead of the law. And the Supreme Court he put in place, the majority, which has people like Amy Coney Barrett and other Opus Dei types on it, has given him a rubber stamp free pass saying anything you do as an official action, you can get away with, something that no other president has ever had. Richard Nixon would still be president today. I know he's dead, but he still would be if that had been in place during that time. By the way, President Ford was a friend of my family. My mother and dad always used to stay in his White House. My mom would go swimming in Betty Ford's pool. Mike Ford, their son, lived in my house for a year. Gail Ford, Mike's wife, babysit my daughter, Jessica. We were part of the mix back in the 70s and 80s. We knew all these people well. I have a folder this thick of handwritten notes from various Republican presidents to me and my dad, thanking us for working on their behalf. Blah, 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 blah. But I know what the fuck I'm talking about. So listen to me. The Opus Dei connection with Project 2025 means this. Should Trump become president again and be kept out of jail by conservative, right-wing, 1930s style fascist Roman Catholics, because that's what this is, he will reciprocate by undermining the entire federal bureaucracy and replacing it with people who agree with the kind of people who run Opus Dei. They will no longer be federal employees in any sense. They will be on a witch hunt for everyone who disagrees with them. Think about it. Social Security, Medicare, all these things would run by fascist right wings, people who could have literally been working for Francisco in Spain in the fascist government there, but they'll be here. Gay rights, finished. Gay rights, finished. Gay rights, finished. Want to hang a trans or gay person off a bridge? You might well get a pardon from the kind of people they will put in the judiciary. You think I'm kidding? Check out the history of Spain under Franco. Contraceptives, in part of their program, openly in their program now, they list contraceptives as in quotes, harder to overturn than Roe. It will be our hardest project, Project 2025 says, anticipating the pushback. But we managed to overturn Roe, so take hope we're going to push this over as well. Contraceptives are under threat from Project 2025. Don't believe me? Just wait. Cast your mind back. If I had told you 10 years ago that if someone like Trump came along enthralled to people like my old friend Franklin Graham, I knew his father well, Billy Graham the evangelist, and that he would paint a target on the back of the 10 Republican people in Congress who voted against Trump in the impeachment hearing and call them traitors, singling them out for God knows what retribution if Trump is reelected this time around. Remember, he's been given carte blanche to do anything to anyone as long as it's an official act. You wouldn't have believed me, but you would have believed me even less if I had told you that Roe v. Wade would be rolled back, 50 years of precedent would be overturned, and that women who are raped in Texas have to bear the child. And women who are dying because of ectopic pregnancies in the wrong state will die unless they can get to a state that does abortions, because they will be quibbled with by layers of anti-woman, fascistic, misogynistic, motherfucking bureaucracy that is un-American. It's straight out of Franco's Spain. That's what they will do. The tax system will be revised to help their friends like Elon Musk and fuck all the rest of us. They did it once. It's the only thing Trump achieved was legislation to make himself richer. And that's all they will do next time. Trump will not be calling the shots. The people who keep him out of jail in Project 2025 will be calling the shots. I was there when the groundwork for all this was laid. I know how merciless these people are. I know they are also liars and just as mercenary con artists as Trump. How did all these people in these non-profit foundations wind up with multi-million-dollar mansions and private jets? Why did their precursors in things like the 700 Club that I was on 7 times back in the day when I was an evangelical right-wing activist with Pat Robertson, how did he wind up as a billionaire owning a big majority interest in a diamond mine in South Africa? You sent him your $25 to keep America Christian. What you got for the money was a college, a hotel complex, a television spread, and a billionaire in return. Jerry Falwell, the evangelist, lent me his private jet to fly around America when I was barnstorming it in the 80s. And when I was the keynote speaker at the Southern Baptist Convention, I talked to 23,000 pastors and I laid out our agenda. It's the same agenda that is now being prosecuted. But I'm going to conclude with this. In those days, we were the outsiders. Oh, we thought we were lucky if one of the presidents would even meet with us for a minute. Access to power. But we hadn't put a president in the office and kept him out of jail, and he owed us literally his life. We hadn't loaded the entire Supreme Court and federal judiciary with clones of Amy Coney Barrett, hot out of Roman Catholic and evangelical right-wing fascistic Christian nationalist backgrounds, who have been groomed since law school to do this. You vote for Donald Trump and put him back in office, and you are voting for Opus Dei and Project 2025. I know what I'm talking about. My name is Frank Schaeffer.